Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a special episode of Polititeen. This episode, we wanted to take a step back before the election and listen to our host, Ray, discuss his predictions on issues important to young voters. See where they went right, where they went wrong, and be sure to comment your thoughts on how you thought the election would go before you knew the results. And also, make sure to like and subscribe.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Polititeen podcast. As always, I'm your host, Raymond Hennessy, and today we are joined with a member who's been here before, Trex Jones.
Thank you for having me.
Today, we're going to be talking about the election, more particularly the gender divide between the electorate, that of women and men voters primarily. Firstly, to talk about the divide between genders, I think it's important to talk about the rates in which women are supporting Kamala Harris as opposed to Trump and vice versa. According to polling, I think it was the Siena poll, 50% of women support Vice President Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, 53% of men supported President Donald Trump. However, these are not necessarily the only statistics to look at, because more than just the president-elects, we should also talk about just the parties as a whole, which way people lean. And for that end, young women tend to lean Democrat 66% of the time, as opposed to 27% Republican, with the rest being undecided or unaffiliated. Meanwhile, for young men, it's a little bit closer, with 53% to Republicans, 40% to Democrat, with the rest being unaffiliated or undecided. So with that, you can see that there is a larger difference and variation between more than just the candidate, but with party affiliation and party stance. And for that, I think there's a plethora of questions as to why this is happening. Trex, do you have any input on why that could be the case?
Well, yeah, I mean, for throughout time, men have typically leaned Republican, as some of our reports are showing with this. But for this election, it's very interesting, as for one poll, it was citing that 4 out of 10 women cited abortion as their number one issue, and that made up the majority because it was
By plurality, correct?
By plurality, yeah. And so it's very interesting because this sharp difference actually could decide a lot of different elections in different swing states. For example, if the numbers that were holding true in Pennsylvania, if the gender gap in the presidential preference in 2024 was applied to 2020, Harris would win by 35,000 votes in Pennsylvania. So what I was trying to say is right now, if these polling numbers hold true and they were applied in 2020, it would be Harris would win, because of the voter turnout with the women. So it's really interesting that this election, you have such a stark difference between the two.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And I think when we talk about why there's a stark difference, we have to talk about, I think, a widening cultural difference between men and women in terms of not just political issues, but lifestyle and culture. I'll cite this. The number one predictor of whether someone had defected, and I think this was from a Guardian article, correct?
New York Times.
A New York Times, correct. New York Times article. The number one predictor of whether or not someone had defected from Joe Biden to the Republicans or to Donald Trump was whether or not a respondent was Middle Eastern or North African. It was a sign or a reflection of the political toll of the war in Gaza. However, this is interesting. The number 2 predictor of whether or not someone had defected away from Biden was whether the respondent had a very favorable view or any favorable view of the podcaster Joe Rogan. And I think this highlights a social divide between men and women, because I do view this kind of whether or not a respondent had a favorable view of the podcaster Joe Rogan. It's most likely going to be a man having that position or view. It's that men and women are kind of naturally we're dividing. I think men and women are dividing themselves in a sense in terms of interests, in terms of what they view as culturally important or significant or acceptable even. Because I think a lot of women would view Joe Rogan as a very problematic person, as someone who might highlight kind of grunge masculinity, but he is one of the most famous podcasters, one of the most listened to podcasters in America. Among many men and young men especially, they are large fans of the podcast and what he stands for.
Yeah, to go on a little side note on that, it's very interesting with what's happening right now with podcasting. As you can see, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are doing tours on podcasts and using these social media platforms to reach to people. And why I find that interesting is because right now what we're seeing is Gen Z men are trending to be more conservative, while Gen Z women are trending to be more liberal and or more democratic. And it's really interesting because uh, you can see where the money or the ideas of spending time are going. Instead of going to rallies, it's going to podcasting. And by the way, some of these podcasts are very casual. It's not even policy focused. And so I think right now we're seeing a leaning into character instead of policy right now with a lot of these podcasts.
Yeah, it's another step of mass democracy further eroding the sophistication and intelligence of the electorate and what politics should stand for. But that's a side point. But there is a further point of why. Well, according to Professor Elizabeth Onker, it's for women. The reason why women are leaning towards the Dems, it's because of movements such as Me Too. It's because of the Democrats proposing proposing that they would protect abortion access. Meanwhile, former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick would argue that the reason men are leaning towards the Republicans is because men are respecting Trump's strength and their arguments around masculinity. And I think it's important that we talk about why men are leaning in to the masculinity. There's, the masculinity and masculinity content is a broad church. You have guys leaning from, Andrew Tate, which is the most one end toxic kind of masculinity, to more, you see like those, I don't know if you see on YouTube, every now and then you see like this like 50, 60-year-old guy just having some random YouTube video about hunting in the woods, and it gets like a lot of views of just men just wanting to watch it because it's kind of like this online father, paternal figure doing something very masculine that I think men are drawn to.
Yeah, I don't know what it is with for men and like this kind of suddenly awakening, or it's maybe just being more flashed into men's faces about the idea of appealing to masculinity and kind of going to it and kind of indulging in it. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have like those Andrew Tates and I don't even know, but just all those kind of those influencers that are really pushing it and really pushing men to start exploring that realm of them. So I think it's very interesting. I don't think they're the main cause of it. I think it's been a sudden thing that's been kind of slowly occurring for a lot of men, and maybe it dies down every once in a while and comes back up for masculinity, but I don't know.
Well, I don't think they're the cause. I think I don't know if it's the symptom or they're the result. Like Andrew Tate came up as a result of men wanting something more masculine. And I don't think this is new. You see throughout history, there's been times where there's been expressions of masculinity that have gone really powerful. For example, Fight Club, which is not a new movie. It's a rather old movie. But that is like the raw essence of like masculinity and like breaking out from the societal norms that kind of what the view is like trying to chain man in, like kind of neuter. So this urge towards like expressing the masculine, I don't think is a new trend. It's just that something has changed within the last few years fundamentally where it's at a new level. It's at a new tipping point where I think men feel especially young men feel they don't know where they're going as men. They don't know what it means to be a man anymore. And this kind of definition crisis or meaning crisis has led to a special kind of wave of masculinity, which breeds men like Andrew Tate, which breeds men like, I don't know, Hamza. These are, I don't know, like cringe YouTubers, but I think it's a unique environment now where we're having a unique form of and here's the thing, this is a uniquely male phenomenon where I don't think it's true at all for women. Like women, like I am a man, you are a man. We can only talk so much about the female perspective here as two men. Let's make this go. This is probably be a real masculine dominated conversation on why men are trending the way they are because we are men and we can only go so far in trying to understand why women are leaning more progressive without having a woman here. Let me just, I feel like that's important to say.
Yeah.
But when it comes to women, I don't think they haven't had this kind of crisis of femininity to the degree that men have, where men are questioning everything about what it means to be a man, how to act like a man, but also in the context of like the modern world, being a man, I think is very much, a lot of society, especially like civilized society, structured society, is very contrary to the nature of a man in the sense that, starting from the very beginning in classrooms, you have to sit down and be quiet and listen. And if you don't, you have ADHD and you get medicated right away. And it's rather damaging just from a young age. And because of that, I think there's a lot of like the masculine urge tends to be very strongly suppressed, and then because of that, it ends up coming out in very toxic, bad ways.
Yeah. I think why this is being sparked up though for both genders, because I want to touch on that a little bit. I think when you look at both narratives from the left and the right, both genders are under attack. You know, for Republican talking points, it's men are under attack. They don't want you to be a man. They want to, suppress you. They want to
make your sons daughters.
yeah, but it's like they do think like the narrative is men are under attack. And for the left argument is women are under attack from the system. We have I mean, we can go from, I think, maybe stemming from the 80s, as in 2022, some people talked about passing the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And then, also talking about in 2022, Roe v. Wade gets overturned and abortion is now on the ballots in a lot of states. So it's like both narratives are stressing that both are like for left leaning people, women are under attack. And for Republicans, it's men are under attack.
No, I think that's very true. And I think this is very dangerous rhetoric because, to be quite honest, modern society or any society, you need harmony between men and women. And this kind of warfare of, men are being under attack, women are being under attack, and they kind of blame the opposite party, whether it be, men are trying to restrict women's rights or women are trying to feminize men into nothing, It's not healthy for society to be blaming the other sex. I think it's a uniquely dangerous thing. And the fact that women, especially young women, are becoming more and more progressive and men are becoming much more conservative is leading to a much bigger gap in how both genders see the world. And you see this even on campus today. When you talk to like students who are male and students who are female, you do notice that there is a clear difference in how they view the world. There's a clear difference in how they view politicians, how they view the meaning of leadership, what it means to lead, how to lead. Down to the fundamental. It's like there's no more fundamental agreements anymore.
Yeah.
Everyone starts from their own first premise, if that makes sense. And from there, just the disagreements and contrasts grow and manifest. And I think this goes into, you could, I think, maybe talk more about it, is the perceptions of, who exactly has it easier or better in today's society, men or women.
Yeah, and so we actually looked at a study from Pew Research from 2017 to 2024, and what it showed was all Americans believe that it went from 35 in 2017, 35%, to 47%. Men have it easier, and for women, it went from 9% in 2017 to 13%. What I thought was the most interesting, though, was for Democrats, where for Democrats, it went from 49% to 68%, and for women, it stayed from 6% to 6%. And for Republicans, it actually went up. They were very close, and then they actually started separating from each other. For example, in 2017, men had a 16%, had it easier, as it was stated, and women had it easier at 12%, and then it went to 32% for the men and 19% for the women.
Yeah, so amongst Republicans, the margin between who believes men or women have it easier, it was 4% in favor of men, and then it grew to 13% difference that men have it easier.
And I think it's really interesting because, I mean, with those numbers, like the 68%, I mean, happening right now with the 2024 election, I mean, it's a very, you can even just talk about it in a lot of ways. I mean, we had an article in Politics and Values that talked about how Donald Trump, when he got to power, it was kind of spit in the face to American democracy, to Obama, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the quote was, Obama had to be a Harvard-educated lawyer. Trump just had to be a billionaire or something like that. And I think relating that back to this is like Kamala Harris has been called as, not qualified or very not educated in some circles because of like I actually don't know why, because she is educated and she is a former like senator, like she does have the qualifications, but like there was no questions asked with Joe Biden,
Mm-hmm.
and then with Harris there was a lot of questions asked. So I think it is a thing that has some truth that holds to it, that like men do have it easier in perceptions and all that, and that is seen with Democrats.
Yeah, but I think in the case of both Obama and Kamala Harris as compared to Trump or Biden is that there is a racial element to it.
Yeah.
That being that both Obama and Kamala are people of color, meanwhile Biden and Trump are both white, Caucasian. And I think that does have a very significant role in it as well as race, as well as gender. But I will say I do think that when it comes to leadership, and this is an example of how we call or refer to people. I forgot where I read this, but when it comes to Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris, we like to call them by their first names or we call them by their full names. Meanwhile, for Trump or Biden, we call them strictly by their last names because by calling someone by their last name, it indicates a more sense of authority, strength. While saying the first name or calling someone like Kamala, or just Hillary, or Hillary Clinton, it comes off as nicer, more welcoming, more caring. And this is something that's leaned into by both Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton in their campaigning. If you were to compare the commercials or political campaigns and to support themselves, Harris and Hillary Clinton during their campaigns took a much more maternalistic approach to their commercials, where it's like, I am who I am. I'm going to care for America. We'll see it better. Meanwhile, Trump, for example, he's the very strong. We need to protect America. Stop the rampant scamming that Americans are going under. Even just the tones fundamentally are very different.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting. I think I don't know if you and I talked about with the names thing, because everyone's like, is it like Kamala or Kamala, all that?
Kamala,
and I was
Kamala,
like, why are we? It's typically we just do Biden, Trump.
Mhm.
Why not just do Harris? If you want to simplify it, I think you and I talked about that, or I talked about it with somebody else, because I was like, I don't know why that's the discussion, but that is also a really true point that it is seen as like, it can be used as more gentle and more, I don't want to say, I guess less threatening, because Trump comes off as like, like I'm gonna stop this, I'm gonna do this. It's very aggressive, and yeah, I think that the Harris Wallace ticket are taking a very more soft approach with using their first names and coming off more friendly and trying to get their favorability up with people. Another thing was I will get back to that. I forgot my point, but
Yeah, no, but I that's fine. I think it reflects also just what the former Detroit mayor said, of the sense that the Republicans know there is somewhat of a masculinity crisis among young men, and Trump is leaning very strongly into that. And having a guy like Vance, who some would argue, for example, this is actually a really interesting point. Vance has a beard.
yes.
This is uncommon in modern politics to have a beard, because having a beard is representative of being hyper masculine. It's a very masculine trait amongst female voters. Apparently, it's off-putting actually, and to have Vance come on, another man, strong name, Vance, Trump Vance, and had to have a man with a beard. It's really leaning into the Republican kind of Republicans are leaning into masculinity as a way to pick up young male voters.
Yeah, I remember when Vance got nominated. I remember I saw so many articles talking about his beard, and it's been like, I feel like it's 49 years or something like that since like the last time there was a person that even, I think, ran / or vice president had a beard. It was one of those two. And it's very interesting. Like, I do think with Trump's nomination, there was a lot better picks that could have helped him out with different groups of people. But he picked Vance. I didn't really understand it. And as time progresses forward with this election, it's making so much more sense as he's leaning into rough background. I am leaning into my masculinity. He always is, just kind of leans into that. And it's American, like he does the American dream story, and he also leans into his masculinity. And I think that's kind of where he comes in as a vice president.
Well, I'm wondering, let me ask you, do you think that because more and more young female voters are becoming progressives, they're voting for Democrat, do you think that the kind of Trump strategy is like to kind of almost give up on women? Because I know he's given town halls with women to address concerns of women, but it does seem like, for the most part, both parties have understood the gender divide and have leaned into the gender divide. And that's how I've seen this election
Yeah.
so far.
I mean, and I think that is interesting. I do think giving up on women in the Trump campaign is a fatal error. I think they're not trying to do that. As you can see, they try to come back with like, well, we're states' rights, we're states' rights. At the same time, he did pick somebody like Vance that has been for stricter abortion stances. I don't know all of its stances, but been for more stricter ones. And yeah, I mean, he is leaning into that. I mean, when you see him um, I think it was on the New York Times interview, he was talking to this reporter, and the reporter was like, "Oh, we need these immigrants to come in and take these low-paying jobs." And his first thing was going, "No, men want construction jobs." And what stuck out to me was he just used men multiple times throughout the interview, and it's appeal to, "Hey, I'm going to try to protect your jobs. You can have those more masculine jobs. You don't need to go to college. Go to construction. Work in construction.
Lay some bricks, boy.
Lay some bricks." It's literally I think that is the Trump campaign. I mean, it seems like that. I mean, look at like the debates as we talked about. Common sense. Like it is a very big turn from academics and saying, "Hey, go to school." It's now going, go work in construction. Go work with your hands. Go into trade. Let's help the trade workers. Let's help. And you see this even with the union right now with a private vote that they had 60-40, as I think that was one of the reports for Trump.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if the Trump campaign is really leaning into more masculine or more hands-on jobs as well, but that's what I think is seen with them.
No, I 100% agree. They are leaning into the everyday man, specifically man. When we use man, like not in the term of like everyone, I mean specifically man. And I think this also represents your point about like, don't go to college, like why do you have to do construction? It's also the idea that the fact that college tends to have a like bias towards women. Women succeed more. They go to college at higher rates. They tend to succeed in college more. Men start to fall off after high school. They even start falling off during high school. The higher education system, just statistically, does seem to have, on the average, when it comes to men and women, it seems to make women better off. And because of that, I think there is kind of a resentment amongst the blue-collar men, workers who didn't go to college. They view certain people, and I think this kind of goes back into like the culture war and the gender wars. Like you have these people who go to college, us. Yeah. Respectfully, yes, that includes us. They're sitting in these nice air-conditioned rooms. They're
Very
talking
nice.
all this high talk. They're creating all these gender theory and Marxist theory, but they're not the ones laying bricks and creating the buildings that they're sitting in or the AC that they're currently enjoying. And they're not appreciating the foundations of society. And I think it is kind of this mentality that's kind of hitting a point that's leading to these, like even the unions now saying we should be voting for Trump to protect our jobs, but also just to stick it to the high academics.
Well, yeah, and I really wish I knew the podcast was going to go this direction, because when you look at 2020, college enrollment numbers and post 2020, there's a big decline on college men going into college and sticking with college and dropping out of college. And there was a rise in trade jobs and working with your hands and like sales. So it was very interesting. I wish I had the numbers on this, because that was something I remember reading about, was like 2020, there was a big kind of awakening that enrollment numbers went down regarding men.
Yeah, and I mean, I could talk this just on a personal level. Amongst all my cousins and like my immediate friends from back home, every single one of my cousins and friends that was a girl has gone to college, but maybe about 25 to 33% of my guy friends who are around my age decide to go to trade school or go to vocational training.
Yeah.
And that is a massive difference when you think about it. This is, my personal story, like my personal friends, but every girl I knew out of high school went into college. But that was not the case for men. There was a much higher rate of either guys that I knew either did not even pursue any higher education. They guys just dropped out, they flunked out entirely, or they went to vocational training to become plumbers, to become electricians. So I think this kind of furthers the fundamental divide, because like just factually speaking, unless you're going to like Liberty University or whatever, you're going to be exposed to more like progressive liberal like thought when you go to college and university. But when you're not going, you're staying home local. You tend to be more conservative. You tend to be more right-leaning based. And then this kind of divide just increases monumentally. I think over time, the cleavage will grow just from that alone.
Yeah. And I think that is I think that's how this direction where we get the men today that are siding with Trump and that are doing that. I mean, with some of the numbers I talked about with like the states, a lot of it came down to women are the majority in America, but they also have the best voter turnout. And that's where I don't know if this is a new thought that just came, was maybe the Trump and Vance campaign is trying to get men so energized to finally turn out that if they were able to turn out, that they would be able to win some of these states and win some of these votes. Because if they get them to turn out, that's the name of the game. It's getting them to turn out. But I want to take this back to the Harris and Wallace campaign and kind of look at what they're going with this. And I think it is an appeal to a more, I don't even know what the word would be, but a plurality of Americans, like masculine or feminine. But hey, go to college, do this, and having a more friendly face. I mean, Tim is supposed to be this Midwest guy. Is supposed to be this really friendly person that's really supposed to try to bring on, try to help with men with Harris. Because when you look at his background, he was the football coach. He is in the military, I think 20 years, if I remember that correctly. And, he also started the Gay Straight Alliance in high school. And he's a guy that hunts. And so for him, his appeal on the Harris ticket is that he is a masculine Democrat guy. And you can be a masculine guy and be a Democrat. And I think that's where his, that's where he comes in for the Harris campaign.
Yeah, no, I see that kind of Walls being expanding the vote. Meanwhile, Trump is more like a doubling down on the already established vote share, trying to bring in. That is interesting, viewing Walls as kind of this alternative masculine like future.
Well, I mean, like when you look at like when you I think when you think of a manly man, right? I think most people would have the assumption that they lean Republican. But Walls, I mean, you have Democrats in the past like JFK or FDR that have been these really masculine men that were Democrats. And I think Waltz is kind of one of those things that can really help out with the Democrats' image on that and help with these young conservative men that are thinking that they can't be Democrats because it's not part of the masculine identity.
Yeah, especially kind of this idea of like a countryside kind of Democrat, which you don't really think of. When you think of a Democrat man, you think of a metropolitan sissy boy, straight up, as compared to the Southern hick, who's a Republican. That's what tend to be like the two kind of reductionist views of, or the country club Republican. It's like there's two types of Republicans. Yeah. The Democrats, they're just the sissy men. But that is interesting. I think he also plays a role in the sense of, well, when we talk about the Kamala Harris campaign, if we look at like all the major, I'll put like trends of the campaign. For example, brat. Yeah. As a straight man, I don't think brat has a lot of appeal to a guy like me, but I know it's a rager amongst girls and gay men. And it's just straight up like, I don't get it at all, but I don't think I'm supposed to get it, to be straight up with you. So a lot of stuff like that, just down to like the fundamentals, just like what is being, like how she's writing out this election. Like, yes, Walls has to be that kind of counterpoise to kind of say like, no, Ray, there is a place for you in this party. But I don't know if it works as well as Trump trying to really double down on the masculine vote, because I think when it comes to, Trump and Vance, it's very clear what they're trying to do. It's very clear what they're standing for. I think when you have Walls up, he's kind of, I mean, this sounds bad, but compared to how like I think feminine-centric Kamala Harris's campaign has been so far, Walls isn't a strong enough masculine figure to really counterpoise it.
Yeah, I could see that. I think, yeah, I mean, he's not strong enough, I guess, in that sense.
He doesn't have a beard.
Oh, Waltz. Sorry. Waltz is not strong enough. I thought you said Vance. I don't know why I was. That's what.
I don't think Waltz is masculine enough.
I think that if they leaned into his hunting but now he like, well, yeah, I used to carry those guns when I hunt, but now I want to restrict them or I want to. But if they leaned into his hunting, I think it's amazing for her ticket. I mean, think about it. It's like you have this guy that's hunts and like, like you were talking about earlier, those hunting videos get millions of views. They're like really bad quality. Like, but
That's the draw.
that's the draw. It's like some really bad quality, some random dude has no commentary, but it's just like, I hunt. And I think that's appeal. That's Wall's appeal. That's Wall's secret weapon to winning over a lot of men that are maybe conflating masculinity with politics instead of having them separate, and that's therefore causing them to be more Republican instead of exploring their masculinity and maybe identifying with Democratic politics. That's what I think was really interesting with that idea.
Well, let's take a step back for a minute and
Yeah.
talking about young men trying to lean Republican and not, and Wall's trying to be the kind of countersetting that. According to that same New York Times article that I mentioned before, they said that the Democratic Party might be heading towards like a demographic trend of perhaps like Democratic collapse among young men, where at the current rates things are going, if the trend were to continue at the rate of men are leaving the Democratic Party and becoming more lean towards Republican, the Democratic Party cannot expect to get a sizable amount of young men as voters at all in the future. And when we talk about, for example, party registration amongst young women today, 41% are registered as Democrats, as compared to only 18 as Republicans, with the rest being either unaffiliated or unregistered or independent or something else. As for men, on the other hand, it's 28% are only registered as Democrats, while 27% as Republicans. It's a lot more even. But also, according to that same statistic, there's a caveat, which I didn't know about until reading about this. In southern states, there's a few southern states that don't do party registration.
Yeah.
So the states that do party registration tend to lean Democrat, but the several states in the South that don't do party registration means you don't register to be a Republican or register to be a Democrat, which I'm still trying to understand. It's a little weird to me. It's most likely that it's more likely that if those southern states did do party registration for young men, it would lean Republican.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I didn't know about that either, and I think what it is, if I remember correctly, is you can go to the ballot though and vote in the primaries, right? Because there's two different things. There's California that has the system where they don't do a primary, but they just pick the top two candidates in an open primary, and then I think this one is like you don't walk in there and go like, I'm a Republican, give me my Republican ballot. You might just choose a Republican ballot or a Democratic ballot.
So is that a open primary or is that like a general
I think that might be an
election?
open primary, but I don't know enough about it, so I don't know. Because, I mean, Arizona, we have an open primary, but we have registration.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that means they just have open primary and no registration. So
Yeah, I don't really get it, but I mean, regardless of how they set up their primary system, it's kind of besides the point. It does skew the numbers of registered Republicans to Democrats. But here's an interesting statistic: is that over the last year, young men have registered Republican by a 6% margin, from 30 to 24%.
Yeah.
So, by that, it does show that more and more men are going towards the Republican Party than not, even though the Democratic Party still technically has more registered Democrats on paper. That being said, where do you see the Republican Party heading if it keeps up this trend of masculinity as compared to the Democratic Party?
I think the party will lean into more labor-intensive jobs. We'll stick and maybe get away from helping with talking about higher education, and we'll go more towards home building and getting a house, and we'll talk about tax credits for families. I mean, that's talked about with both parties, with Harris's campaign and also the Trump campaign with family tax credits. But I think the Republican Party, if this trend was to go on for, let's say, another 10 years, as Gen Z becomes older and starts voting and starts getting more voter registration, because we're just now getting into the scene of politics as Gen Z, if that trend happens and keeps going on, I really think you will have, as talked about, this advanced revolution with the party and appealing to the working man and helping the working man and maybe breaking away from that being Democrats are only helpful with the unions. It'll be now the Republicans are, and the Republicans are the ones that are leading that charge because they're going for those masculine men that are working in those construction jobs, that are working in those jobs that have unions. And I think that's maybe this where that could go.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting how, I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but just like talking about how the Republican Party is going, it's very interesting how parties change and shift over time. Where the Republican Party was viewed for a long time as the country club Republican Party, where like the rich would go and vote, but now they're trying to really lean into that idea of like, no, 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 the Democratic Party has actually become that. They become the party of high intellectual elites and you know Massachusetts Harvard grads, where the party of the common man now. It's interesting how it seems like over time these parties go through like these fundamental changes of makeup.
Well, yeah, and I would say the Republicans are really good at scaring people that love traditions, that love the idea of a nuclear family. They're scaring the living hell out of them with Democrats and like with Harris's campaign and Wall's campaign with him. I don't think they talked about his abortion stance, but you know, the Gay Straight Alliance Club, and in Harris's one of her respondent or her response to some random survey from I think the Human Rights Center or Human Rights group that said that she would provide some transgender care to people in prison.
Right, gender affirming care.
Yeah, gender affirming care.
Gender affirming care for illegal migrants in prison.
Like, but like that is used now as a talking point to show like, look at she's radical, comrade Kamala Harris, she's radical, and you know like Tim Walz, he gets attacked for putting tampons in schools, and it's like why? So like literally some nicknames are Tampon Tim for him. So it's like it's kind of just like crazy. But no, I'm just saying that is the craziest part.
No,
it is an attack on a more accepting or slash more I guess not gender. Well, gender, sex, I don't know. Openness to it, and having since he put tampons in the boys' bathroom. I don't know, like. Kind of like I don't know how to explain it, but
kind of viewing like I don't know. But
I just think making more of a open and progressive America, the Republicans are very able to attack that and scare like men that are maybe kind of weary of it and pull them in with that.
Well, yeah, I think the Republican Party, they have a very strong potential of trying to claim to be the kind of have a monopoly on the party for families, the party for the family structure, and I think that goes down to even at the fundamental level, the education bills that they passed. For example, Glenn Youngkin, he ran on a very strong, parents should know what's being taught in the school system. And I think there's kind of this, one of the big talking points with Republicans and Democrats is kind of like gender, like the gender debate in schools, whether or not, for example, because I feel like the Democratic talking point is that when it comes to like a young student, if they want to learn about gender and like their identity, and the parents won't teach it, it's kind of the school to teach them this kind of stuff, a very fundamental aspect of your identity. But the Republicans would say, no, it's not appropriate, and it should be, if it's going to be taught, it has to be with the consent of parents, because the parents should have the ultimate say over kids. And I think that amongst actual parents, that is a very compelling argument.
Oh, yeah.
Because you don't want some government-paid teacher or person to just start teaching your student or teaching your child that you care for to an immense depth, X, Y, or Z without you knowing or without your consent. It's a very scary thought, not just in the gender debate, but for anything. The idea that your teachers could be teaching something without you knowing, that could be to you, to any degree, either subversive or inappropriate. It's a very scary thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen that within my personal life when I worked with the school board in high school. And I really think COVID in 2020 caused this really sharp change. And I would even look at it with gym trends and all that, but that's a whole separate topic where we see now a lot of men going to the gym. I wish I brought this up earlier. But talk about the parents being involved and talking about the families thing. I remember when I was at a school board meeting, like parents were there and they were protesting and they would boo people down when they talked about these things. They would read books from the libraries, be like, why is this here? And we're seeing a very sharp change in America with parents being involved now with their schools. I think it's always been there and it's been steady, but then COVID happened and parents were seeing we're seeing the schooling, and now we're intrigued, and it had a spike, and that that movement led to two people that were very big parents' rights on my local school board to be elected. That led to Youngkins talking about CRT and being elected. Look at DeSantis. He leaned into that for education, and he was elected by 19 points in Florida. And now Florida's it used to be a swing state forever. Now it's a Republican state, and so Republicans are using this as a winning strategy. I don't know. I have yet to see it work on a national strategy.
Yeah. Two things. One about like the parent involvement in schools. You can actually look at the trends. There's a book called Blowing Alone, which kind of highlights people's association in terms of like non-governmental things. The PTA kind of peaked, I think, around I can't even give the years. I don't want to mess it up. But the PTA had been declining for a very, very long time. The membership had gone down by like tens of millions. When it was first created in the past, like I think around the 70s and 80s, it was very popular. Over time, it was progressively decreasing. And only recently, I think as a result of COVID, people kind of having reflection. But also, I think just the idea of you can now hear what the teachers are kind of teaching the kids through the computer screen. They have a more in-depth, or also trying to help the students or help their children with like more schoolwork, being more involved now because you have to be in there in the COVID years. It kind of made them realize by taking a step back to the school system, the things that they didn't like that had developed. And that's why now you see this giant kind of resurgence of like being interactive with the school, realizing that, it's a public service. I actually have a say and I have a right to, influence it rather than just say it's this thing that I send my kids to.
Well, yeah. And I have seen that with family friends of mine that have kids in schools, and like the teacher says like, you would be part of this group or you would be part of this group.
What group?
It was I think it was like the teacher was trying to explain how the KKK worked, and like would walk up to white students and say that like you would be in the KKK or you could be in the KKK, you wouldn't be to like
you're a little too dark.
Yeah, to a student of color. And this family friend was very angered by this, and like it kind of led to more parents being involved. I mean, like for me though, before in middle school, before COVID, I don't even really feel like my parents not like didn't care, but they were like, okay, go to school, do your thing, come back, do your homework. Oh, what'd you learn about? History, blah, blah, blah. And now you're seeing a big change where parents are like, well, what'd you learn? Can we look at that? Can I read about it? Or like, whatever. Like, I think there's now a very big thing. And I think that culture war with that will also go back to female and males, and how that will intertwine would be like, I don't know, like maybe the more Republicans and the men, if men keep going more Republican, that like Republicans might go a national social standard and try to run on that and try to win on that instead of kind of leaving it to the states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of people, I mean, I'm guilty of saying this a lot of times, like the culture war is BS. Like it's not what we should be focusing on. We should be focused on economics, like social policy and like foreign policy. Like we just need to focus on major things. We have people like, dying in our streets, not being able to eat. Like, why are we talking about gender affirming care for illegal migrants? That's not an issue in my head.
Yeah.
But it would be wrong, and I'm guilty to sometimes just disregard it completely and be like, "This bullshit. I'm not going to consider it," because I do think that part of the reason why there is such a gender divide is because of the culture war and how bad it's gotten. Where the culture war has like fundamentally, just talking about like what we teach in school of gender identity is such a hot topic that sways elections very strongly. But then also just like culture war topics of a woman's place versus a man's place. Culture war topics of, for example, the family structure. Should we have the atomic family maintained? All these kind of things I think fundamentally cleave apart men and women as we're taking different positions on it. And I just wonder, at what point is it going to give? Something's got to give when the men and women of America don't see eye to eye at all. We're so at odds. What will happen then?
And it's very interesting you bring that up, because I think that was kind of one of Vance's attacks on Harris. I think it was hinted at like she never had her own kids, and like he kind of went towards attacking the crazy cat ladies or something like that. They don't have a stake into America, and it's like the Vance and Trump ticket is trying to appeal to that family. It is interesting though that they're not they're kind of appealing to the old fashioned way of like, oh honey, like stay at home. But even though his wife is a lawyer, Vance's wife is like a really respected lawyer, went to Yale as well, and so yeah, it's interesting. I do think we're gonna have this weird thing of traditional conservatism in the family structure, but at the same time, not be seeing it being like, oh, they can't be gay marriage. Because I do think the Gen Z is becoming progressive in that way, in the sense of laissez faire
Yeah.
with that. But then at the same time, like wanting to promote or support
Right.
family structure.
So
like
what
that.
I see the fundamental change is this, and this is how I'm kind of understanding the conservative. This is how I kind of view it through my lens. It's that the conservative movement has realized that it has lost socially by saying you do you, I do me. I'm not going to espouse my views onto you. That kind of libertarian mindset is, I think, fundamentally a losing mindset when it comes to social battles. What the Republican Party, I think, is slowly becoming and the conservatives are becoming is this. You can do you, yes, but we should still have a national agreed consensus on what we should aspire to. We should aspire for the nuclear family. We should aspire for the male to maybe be a breadwinner and have kids. But that doesn't mean the woman can't work, or that doesn't mean, for example, you can be gay. Like that doesn't mean you can't be gay. You could, you know. No, whoa. Like it does. Like it's more like you can still do you, but at the end of the day, we should have these things be taught as this is what we should aspire to, and almost like kind of push. It's like pushing the ideals, but not necessarily having to live up to the ideals, but at least having certain ideals rather than having no ideals, just being pure individualistic. I do me.
Yeah, and we talked about this before. I think we had a great conversation of like what kind of pulls these people that are maybe libertarian or I'm the people that go I'm socially liberal but economically conservative, and now it's becoming well I'm socially or conservative and economically conservative. I'm just a conservative. That's what people start saying, and for me, I felt that change came maybe because money was going to social causes of that sort, where people might now see that I can't just be a social liberal and I have my social conservative or my economic conservative causes because they're now at battle with each other. But my social conservatism on economics is now being attacked because of social liberalism, or not social liberal, but like the Democrats are doing stuff that will go against my values and they're spending money. And now they're like, okay, well, how do I defend against that? Well, I now have to become now socially conservative. So I do think that there is something of that element causing maybe a bigger switch into people becoming more Republican and identifying as Republican because they were always not lukewarm. I don't want to use that word lukewarm, but lukewarm in the sense of they don't want to identify with the Republican Party because they weren't socially Republican. But now they are becoming socially Republican because that's how they will defend their economics views.
Yeah, but I think even at that now, the shift in economic views towards a more protectionist mindset, it helps that further kind of social conservatism in the sense of like we have to protect America, protect American trade, American life, American business. And I think that naturally kind of wraps itself in with, American culture, American identity. It's no longer just open up the floodgates of the market, send our jobs abroad, get cheaper goods, like kind of this neoliberal consensus. That's dying, in my opinion. That is dying, rightfully so. You want your stuff 6% cheaper, that's fine. But then you're going to have like this whole entire region of America get completely wiped out and have no jobs. Okay. Yeah, maybe that wasn't the best idea. And I think this is also coming to the point of the common man, where Vance would like argue it's like the same academics who told you XYZ were also the same who shipped your jobs abroad and was the reason why you're in such a desolate state. And I'll harken this back to my grandfather, who was a lifelong Democrat. He voted, I think, for a Democrat except for like 2 times in his life. And one of the times he decided to vote Republican, I think was against, who was it? I forget, it was one of these Massachusetts like highly educated snobs. He was like so sick of him. He was like, I'm not going to vote for this Democrat.
John F. Kennedy?
No, not Kennedy, not Kennedy, not Kennedy. It might have been like some sort of Alf Landon type or something like that. But I do think that there is this natural pull of, you know, this class divide where when you are even a socially liberal kind of guy, when you see all these like real upper educated Harvard elites or Yale elites and you look at them and they think that they're so much better and pompous because they're educated while you're just some lowly worker, you know, there is a deep-rooted, I think, dissatisfaction and distaste for those kinds of people.
Well, look at COVID. I think look at COVID-19 and like this is where you start having this big switch of change where people start looking towards I wouldn't say alternative medicine or whatever or disinformation, whatever it is, right? But they start looking at it and start being like, you know what? Like I know what's right for me. I know it's like good for me. And I think that's what kind of happened was that people kind of just started going towards like that stuff and started being sick and tired of being told, you don't know anything, you don't know this, you're wrong, and you need to, you know, trust the science.
Trust the science. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's really tough. I'll say that. It's really hard to see which way both parties are going, clearly, because parties change surprisingly quick, in my opinion.
Yeah.
How from the Bush era, it was a clear, you know, country club Republican. Then you had like some like real like working class, real low people who like voted for the Republican Party, but it was mostly like a rich people party. And how quickly in the span of 40 years now, it's trying to be the party of the middle, like the party of the blue collar, while saying that the Democrats are out of touch. They're the party of the elites now. Mm-hmm. And again, I think this kind of also touches back to, you know, these upper high educated elites go to college. Most people who go to college now are women, like, so it kind of like plays hand in hand with each other.
Yeah.
But with all that being said, do you see it getting better? Do you see the cleavage possibly closing, or is it at this moment it just will get worse?
I think it's caused because of culture and social. Mm-hmm. And it's not like a rich versus poor in a sense of like country club Republicans versus, you know, like the working class. Mm-hmm. I think it's now like trying to resist like I think it's now correlated with like high academic elites are telling you that your way of life is wrong and that you like are completely wrong. I think this is kind of what's causing that change to be the divide. So if America can become a lot more closer in the sense of what they want culturally and like where we want to go forward on that front, I don't think it's even an economics difference. I think it's a cultural difference. And because you have two different, vastly different Americas in both worlds, not even on just economics, but because, I mean, look at the economics. Biden administration and Trump's administration had a lot of the same tariffs on China. So it's not really an economics thing, I think. I think it's more of a culture and where we want to go with certain things of our culture.
Definitely. It is fundamentally, it is up to the people. But also, I think leaning into the more masculine, the more feminine, it is where leaning into this will take us, the consequences of it, whether or not it'll lead to kind of this continuous spiral, this death spiral of gender divide or not. It will remain to be seen. And it'll be very interesting seeing how, for the next coming elections, whether or not Trump wins or loses, how the Republican Party will sell itself and market itself, and how the Democratic Party will respond. And, you know, we talk a lot about the Republican Party centrically, but I just think that's because the Republican Party is the party going through fundamental shifts. I think the Democratic Party is a lot more, even though it has its wings, it's a lot more stable and knows what it is. Meanwhile, it is the Republicans at the end of the day that they're in an identity crisis and they got to figure themselves out.
Yeah, I think that's really what's happening.
Yes. Well, Trex, thank you so much for being on the episode once again. We appreciate you, the listener, for coming in again. And thank you. This episode was brought to you by our producer, Miles Moorfield, our researchers, Trex Jones here, and Michael Scher. This episode was brought to you by the Ox Institute. For more information and keep up with them, follow them at oxinstitute.org. Thank you.
Wow, first try. There we go. Yay. That was really good.
My mouth was so dry. Started out.
I was drinking so much water.
No, I was like, fuck. I thought I had your number on in my contacts. I only have it on GroupMe, I think, or I didn't save your number. But I was like sitting there like, how do I get my water? Where the fuck's my water? I was like, my mouth was so dry. At the 30-minute mark or like the 25-minute mark, I was just sitting there. I'm like, all I could think about was water.
Oh my god, no, I would have. Wait, here. I'll send it in the.
Okay, no, it's fine. I hope that doesn't
No,
happen
but like,
again.
y'all should have it anyways.
What?
Oh, my number.
I think
That's
no,
so
I
funny.
have her number. I don't think I have it saved or something. But I was just like sitting there. I was so thirsty, and I have a way to text on my like laptop. But I was like, fuck, I don't have her contact.
Get me
So
water.
I was like, can you please hand me water? No, I thought that started out not that strong, and then we got to JD Vance or like
He has a beard.
perspective
That
stuff.
was so good. I want the episode name to be Start Laying Bricks Boy or whatever.
Lay Bricks boy.
Lay Bricks Boy. Brat Boy.
Rat. No, I
You
really.
don't get brat.
I am afraid I'm.
I
You
don't get it.
Brat.
As
Our
straight white men, we
our
do not
fraternity
understand
might
that.
be
Charlie
doing-
XCX is dating a straight white man. He gets brat.
I don't listen. To
He
Charlie
he
X.
gets brat or he
He
gets
gets brat.
or he
He's a-
gets it.
No, he gets right. He doesn't give brat.
No, well,